Hello, welcome back to Aetheral Space 40.17. You'll never see this in the video, you'll never know why I'm laughing. But I don't know why I did
He's
that.
laughing at my pain, like the Kevin Hart
I'm not,
comedy
you know
special.
I'm not. I spoke in a different language, it amused me.
we did our usual countdown for the video, and he did it the other way around and in Spanish.
Yeah.
It was so hard to keep my count. It was funny, though. But, today is a day of a lot of feelings, so we're not going to think about them. We're just going to dive into this reading. I hope y'all are ready, because I'm about to bring it.
Let's do it.
Aetheral Space 14.17. Goodbye Guests, Part 5. In the bright dark ruins of Grip District, legions did battle with an angel. Flung through the air by manipulated gravity, Rufus von Frostburn repelled a handswipe that could have wiped out an army, and then fired out a beam of heat from a shield that boiled the messenger's chest. Praetorian 1 brought down its other fist to try and crush Frostburn before he could land, but a barrage of pinpoint unworthy shots severed the thin arm at the elbow. The severed limb slammed down onto the ground, resting against a building, forming the ideal bridge for 4 Silver Saint prototypes to charge up and ascend. I love how if you take this paragraph out of context and show it to someone who's in Arc 1, it means nothing to them. It's very good.
What's going on? An angel?
I love it so much. Oh, I love this series. The 2 knights leading the charge were specialized for melee, wielding brightly colored swords in their metal hands. As a deluge of white-hot feathers rained down towards them, they swung their blades in unison, and the resultant air pressure sent those feathers veering off course in every direction. Seeing their opportunity, the 2 prototypes in the back, one wielding a bow and the other a rifle, kneeled down and began firing rapidly at the lower half of Praetorian 1's body. As a being that could float, the Praetorian's legs were superfluous, but the series of massive explosions that consumed the bottom half of its body produced great clouds of smoke that drifted up and obscured its vision. That blindness did not go unappreciated or unexploited. Radiant Almighty! This time, Utoi Musashi...
raid boss.
Yeah, for real. This is the Final Fantasy raid. This fighting a primal. This time, Utoi Musazi's aim was true. The horizontal slash of light, perfectly focused, raced through the clouds and cleanly severed Praetorian 1's neck. The 2 headwings fell for just a moment before twin-feathered tendrils lashed out from the stump of one's head and pulled them back in, reconnecting the severed parts and repairing the decapitation. Roaring in anger, Praetorian 1 shook violently, and another arm of white soft flesh crawled forth from the stump of its severed one. It jabbed a new hand forward, moving to fire another beam of light at Musashi, but a javelin from one of the prototypes struck it and sent the blast off course. A razor-thin line of white carved across the district, and a second later that line erupted into devastation. The moment of distraction bought Musashi the time he needed to spit in the face of God a second time. Radiant, he began, raising his shining sword high. All enough! Praetorian 1 threw out its arms, and a wave of heavenly energy flew out in all directions. Cars and corpses went flying as if they'd been caught in a hurricane. One of the prototypes had been climbing up the angel's back, and so the unfortunate knight was reduced to molten metal in an instant, splatting down onto the distant ground. Taking advantage of the opening it had created...
I can spice that up a bit.
Like spent chewing gum. Taking advantage of the opening it had created, Praetorian 1 raised its hand high and began gathering countless feathers into its grasp. Its rage had reached its zenith. This would make every previous attack seem like the gentlest breeze. This would end everything. If the angel had a mouth, it surely would have been foaming, Sin, 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 sin! With a grunt of mingling effort and pain, Musashi pushed away the debris that had landed on him. The radiant in his hand was still shining, still retaining the energy it had gathered. Slowly he staggered forward and raised it once again. It was the tiniest flicker of a candle, faced with the mighty sphere of white light that was coalescing over Praetorian 1's head. Musashi let out a misty breath. He knew it could not equal what was coming, but what other choice did he have? Once more, as he would until the day he died, Musashi raised his blade to meet the enemy. But just this once, it seemed he wouldn't have to. The front of the Allen Grace Memorial Shopping Center exploded outwards, and from the sudden eruption flew the gargantuan corpse of Praetorian 4. It was propelled by a blast of focused energy, limbs the size of houses flapping into the wind as it was propelled towards Praetorian 1. Before the angel could react, the body of its comrade slammed into it, forcing it backwards and causing it to lose hold of the attack it was charging. The effect was immediate. With a sound like a screaming choir, the ball of light became a beam that blasted upwards, striking the feathered canopy and opening a gaping hole in its surface. Praetorian 1 screamed in anger as it saw what it had done, tossing the body of 4 in half and tossing the chunks aside like pieces of oversized trash. The bayonet that had punctured the giant's brainstem clattered to the ground and dissipated into crimson aether. Majesty! 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 Who? Its rabid fury bounced between targets, its eyes flicking from Muzazi to the prototypes to Frostburn to Mariloko, finally locking in on the ruins of the shopping center's first floor. Whoever had slain Praetorian 4, whoever had thrown that trash at a messenger of light, they would be the one to taste heavenly wrath. Without ceremony or dignity, Praetorian 1 thrust its palm down towards the building, slamming it into a sequence of feathers and sending a beam of scorching heat into the darkness of the shopping center. A second later, the beam came back. It lashed out like a tongue of fire, carving a deep groove through Praetorian 1's body, and even scorching its hardened carapace. Bracing itself with all the defensive abilities it could muster, 1 was still sent flying backwards, and soon enough, it slammed into a skyscraper that collapsed on top of it a moment later, limbs flailing as if it were trying to swim in the air. Praetorian 1 dragged itself out of the rubble. Who? It got an answer soon enough. A demon. It floated out of the smoking rubble with deceptive grace, rising so smoothly as if it were being delicately transported by an invisible hand. Crimson wings of cloth spread through the air behind it. The visage of a skull grinned sightlessly at Praetorian 1 through the mists of humiliation and rage Ruth Blaine and her monarch said had come to play. Heresy! Looking at the egg of hell before them, Praetorian 1's eyes, all of them, could not help but twitch. Heresy! And as the last of its reason crumbled into dust, the angel charged forward like a wild beast. Mariloko had a surefire way to win. He confirmed it when he'd seen a toy Muzazi cut the beast's head off. Clearly there was no brain controlling the body there, or else that would have been the end of the battle. But if this was a puppet with no weak points at all, then there would be no reason for it to waste energy defending itself. So the brain had to be somewhere else. Mariloko suspected it was within the creature's chest, where the heart would rest in any proper being. It seemed to have gotten pissed off when that area got attacked too. There were worse odds to bet your life on. Besides, he had Damon beside him now. It was his job to gamble. He'd just need one chance. He'd need a wound to open up that chest, to create an entrance, to give him the chance to dive in and unleash Unthroned between the bastard's ribs. Gretchen Hale had a surefire way to win. Inspecting the creature from a distance with her green Oz goggles, its nature became obvious. It was a Praetorian from the Hive of Malkuth, stuffed with so many abilities that it had ascended to a truly absurd level of power. The queen had outdone herself. Despite the situation, Gretchen couldn't help but admire the work of a fellow craftswoman. Usually, forcing more than 10 or so abilities into a Malkuth body would cause it to destroy itself in a similar fashion to an aether burn. The queen had gotten around that with a plethora of healing abilities, devoted to nothing but constantly healing the damage the body now suffered just from existing. Even so, it was a losing battle. Within a few hours, the Praetorian would lose its bodily integrity. The resulting explosion would probably take out a good chunk of the landscape, too. Of course, they didn't have a few hours. That was why Gretchen would help the process along a little. In her hand, she held a weapon like an oversized jousting lance, covered in red and blue stripes like it was some kind of plastic toy. Flames drifted off of it as she finally finished her adjustments with Ragnarok Forge. She'd taken a page out of the Queen's book. She'd stuffed this weapon, this aether armament, with a plethora of useless abilities she'd collected over the years. The ability to tell sugar apart from salt with a glance, the ability to sense the speed of nearby traffic, perfect pitch, strawberry-flavored teeth, it didn't matter. How did she collect these abilities?
Well, Ragnarok Forge, if an armament has an ability, she can take it and put it in something else.
That rules. What didn't matter was the fact that once Gretchen pierced the Praetorian's body with this, those useless abilities would flow right into it. Right now, all that was keeping that thing alive was the delicate balance of power. So Gretchen would just go and push the scales down herself, and finally be done with all this bullshit. Rufus von Frostburn had a surefire way to win. The idea had come to him when he'd blocked that attack with Bastardborn. The force of it had been nearly overwhelming. If it wasn't for Mariloko, he surely would have been sent flying. But more than that, the heat it generated in his aether armament had been absurd. If he hadn't immediately released it in a counterattack, he wasn't sure what would have happened. So he'd just have to find out, wouldn't he? Rufus suspected that if Bastardborn couldn't release that energy, the shield would eventually be unable to contain it and detonate, blasting heat in all directions and destroying a good chunk of the district. The more precise attacks Rufus had unleashed so far had only been able to inflict superficial damage on the big bastard, easily healed. But if he hurled the shield at the enemy before it popped, struck at its entire body at once, couldn't that be a different story? He'd lose Bastardborn in the process, but that was fine. Metal was metal and blood was blood. If it was for the sake of human lives, he'd gladly throw away this shield. Atoy Muzazi had a surefire way to win. It wasn't glamorous, but he was confident in it. To the untrained eye, it would appear that his repeated uses of Radiant Almighty were having no effect on the giant, but he wasn't quite so sure about that. The arm that had been severed had regenerated, to be sure, but the limb that had grown in its place was soft and fleshy. Just from looking at it, it was obvious that it didn't approach the strength of its predecessor. It was the same with its head wings. They'd been reattached after Muzazi had chopped them off, but now they hung limp and flimsy, their eyes staring off into the space, a half-hearted repair effort. So in short, this was a battle of attrition. If Muzazi kept hitting the enemy, it would eventually die. There was no need to make it more complicated than that. There were countless people keeping the creature busy, so he'd just keep swinging this sword of his, until his arms fell off. Morgan Noct had a surefire way to win. As he emerged into the white night that the Praetorian had conjured, he looked in astonishment at the sheer destruction that had gripped the district in the last few minutes. The buildings were rubble, and smoke drifted up to blind the red eyes above. Even the shopping center was half collapsed, the roof and entrance wrecked by the battle. He'd done what he could for Nail Mandarin. The king of killers had suffered a truly grievous wound, and Morgan truly didn't know if the amplified heal hurt he'd used would be enough to keep the man alive. Was Muzazi still alive? Fear thundered Morgan's heart for a moment before he saw the distant glow of Radiant Almighty and let out a sigh of relief. It was funny. He'd run all this way to beg for Wu Ming's help, but now, after vanquishing the man's shadow, all thoughts of chasing his teacher had vanished from his mind. Right now, all that existed was the enemy before him. F.A.! Fog poured into his hands, forming once again the shapes of a bow and arrow. Pointing his new weapon at his distant foe, Morgan pulled the string taut, G.A.! and let the power of his shot build. Morgan was silent, standing on the edge of the building, one eye closed as he lined up his shot. Yes, he had a surefire way to win. Right now he felt like an enemy he stood against could be defeated without fail. He let go of the string. Radiant Almighty, Morgan Noct whispered. Ruth Blaine was a battleground. It was funny. As the monarch's head flew around the flailing form of the shining monster, weaving through its swipes and punches, she couldn't help but feel like she could breathe for once. Right now, one wrong move could mean her death, but that was always where she'd done her best work, wasn't it? The events of the last few weeks seemed to crash over her all at once. Alice, Rex! Dragon firing a Gemini shotgun right into Bruno's chest. Dragon winning the Dawn contest. Dragon becoming supreme. In that moment, when she'd seen Bruno fall, what would Ruth have done if Dragon's minions hadn't shown up? Hey, don't worry about this, Dragon. My minions are on the case. Would she have turned her claws against him? Yes, she was sure that she would have. He'd betrayed Bruno and Serena. He'd betrayed her. He'd betrayed Skipper. More than anyone else, he had betrayed Skipper. Skipper was a hero who had wanted to see the supremacy destroyed utterly, who had wanted to change the shape of this world for the better. If he could see Dragon taking the throne he'd worked so hard to shatter, he'd be rolling in his grave. That was right, wasn't it? So why couldn't she truly imagine that happening? And why couldn't she yet bring herself to hate Dragon Hadrian? You've got something planned, haven't you, you asshole? You've still got me waiting for the other shoe to drop, damn it. God damn it! Those thoughts ran calmly through her head as the monarch's set bobbed and weaved around the Praetorian, firing blasts of force that opened up huge cracks in the enemy's carapace, avoiding lethal blows by mere inches, and yet even with all that, Ruth Blaine wasn't afraid. She had no reason to be. After all, she has a surefire way to win. A swipe of the Praetorian's hand just barely caught the front of the monarch's head as it swooped in, and the face of Death's egg shattered open. Something emerged. Even through the haze of its collapsing consciousness, Praetorian 1 felt a moment of confusion. Dead Eyes was still active. Just by looking at someone, Praetorian 1 instantly knew their name. It was something of a gimmicky ability, but it had been installed in one's body due to the slight ocular durability it also provided. It had seen countless names tonight, not one had given it reason to pause. But now, the small blonde girl who had leapt out of the shattered egg like a bullet being fired, she made it hesitate. That name wasn't right. Was it? That name... It recognized it. That name didn't belong to her. Johann Blackbird. The arms of Anna Tristel were lifted by the will of another, and purple aether manifested the shape of a rifle between her hands as her cold eyes were locked onto the angel before her. Der Freischütz, said Johann Blackbird, and he pulled the newborn trigger. Bang! For a moment, there was silence. And then... the giant of light was devoured in an explosion that dwarfed any radiance it might have had. Ooh. So there is such a thing as a magic bullet.
Yeah.
Just took 3 arcs to prove it. Well.
Johann Blackbird beats the fraud allegations.
If I had to go up against whatever the fuck Praetorian 1 is, it might give me a little trouble.
But what about the Supreme? Nah, I'd win. Bro thinks he's Skipper.
Oh my god. Any other Supreme he would have won. It's fucked up. He would own Dragon.
Well, not really. Well, it's not necessarily something that only Cadman could do, the method he used to win.
Catch a bullet in his teeth and be
it.
super muscular?
No. Well, yeah, but the first time he did it, he used an Aether ping to avoid it as well.
Interesting.
So he got the ping and not the Aether on him.
Oh, man. Give me one moment. I'm looking for our questions that we usually have.
And also another Supreme probably wouldn't have, fucked around as much as Cadman did.
That's true. Question. Lan asks, who were the favourites to win the 8th Dawn contest?
The 8th one. That's Damon's, I believe, is what he means?
Yes.
No, actually, this is the 9th one, so 8th one would have been Cadman's, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, favourites there were, of course, Gilded Knight, Samson Rhodes. Samson? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Cadman himself, of course. Jesus, you fucking put me on the spot.
The only two people named in the
quickly.
tournament.
Clarice the Imp.
Who?
Clarice the Imp. She was a scurrant with an impish appearance, and she was a pyrokinetic.
Seems like a racist name to give her. I'm not an imp, I'm a human with an imp scurrant.
No, she leaned into it.
Oh, okay.
She liked to go.
And she had a pitchfork.
Yeah.
She got sued by the Fleur family. It was a whole thing.
They didn't like her. They were like, that's fucked up. That's fucked up, and that's not representative of what we do.
Weiser asks, what's notable about the Primordial Ooze Guardian Entity Hero?
Oh, yes, so that's something that occurred on Hexcade. There was a big incident when they were integrating into the UAP, and various things happened, which I will not tell you now, because I'm probably going to write that as a little side story at some point.
Interesting.
And it involved the regulators, it involved the UAP, and it involved the Vanta Black Squad. They were there, and they did some stuff.
Oh. MT asks, if Anatrice emulated the Hellhound, would it be the human version or the doggy version?
It would be the consciousness, so I don't think... She doesn't turn into them, so I don't think that would be a factor, really.
He's like, where are my parts? I don't know how to fight like a human.
He'd be like...
Oh, so fleshy.
It's like, it's so inefficient.
Rurum asks, does Tanhoney just remember / make up all these obscure things we ask him in real time, or do we just not hear him control effing laugh to ask in his notes?
There's a mixture. I hope you don't take too much offence to know that Clarice the Imp was thought of as I said the words. And I had to justify them after the fact. But some stuff I do have already there, and I can just sort of refer back to.
Nice. Alright, well I think that's where we'll cut it. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
No, thank you for watching.
Bye!
Bye!